Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Short Term Show. A lot of you come to us and want to talk about buying multiple properties to rehab or buying a bunch of land to build multiple properties. And our guest today, Bryan Cataldi, has done just that. He's in the middle of a 7-unit rehab. And I am really, really excited to hear his story today. So, Bryan, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. This is a really cool experience. So glad to, like I said, sometimes don't know if I feel too worthy to be on it, but it's pretty cool to do this. So
Of course you are. Of course you are. Everyone is. So, tell us a little bit about who you are and what your background is first.
my background's a winding road. I grew up in Northern Illinois. Grew up racing go-karts and doing some stuff like that. Raced with Danica Patrick and that kind of thing back in the day. So kind of did that for a long time. Went out to school in Iowa. Got my undergrad as a CPA, and then went up to Minneapolis and worked for a while. So you'll notice I kind of did the Midwest tour. Worked up there for a while, CPA at PricewaterhouseCoopers in the tax side of the house, which was actually really cool because, I figured out really quickly. I mean, within the first 3 weeks that I did not want to do that for the rest of my life. But, you're working 70, 80 hours a week and you're looking above you and you're seeing people that are 50 that are divorced and they look 75 and, they're making a bunch of money, but they're not real happy. And decided I didn't want to do that. But it was really cool because I got to sit on the side of the desk where I did a lot of high net worth individuals, right? And these tax returns were, stacks of paper in front of you back in the day when everything was still on paper. And gave you a roadmap into how these people made money. And so that was kind of my first foray, I guess, into, trying to understand what it was that I wanted to do eventually. And, none of them make a bunch of money from a W-2. There's not one of them. They may have a job, they may have a salary, but it comes from one of their companies or it comes from a partnership that they're in, and they're making money from K-1s and real estate and lots of different things, right? And my dad had handed me a book back in the day. So even back in 2001, I'm going to date myself here. Back then, I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. My dad's an entrepreneur. And so I kind of had that in my background and knew that was something I wanted to do eventually. And so, winding road, I knew back then probably the roadmap in front of me of what I should do. And it took me a long time to finally get there. Didn't want to be a CPA, moved back to my hometown, started a company, tried to, but I was pretty young and didn't have the character or the wherewithal to be able to do it. So ran a company around race car stuff for a while and did okay with it. 2008 happened, bottom fell out of the world. Disposable income is what drives race car stuff. And that writing is on the wall. I probably need to do something different. And so I went back to school, got my MBA only because I don't know what else to do. Right. And was trying not to be pigeonholed as a CPA or an accountant, and started teaching on the side. I was like, man, I like this, and I need to figure out a way to make money, good money, and have some flexibility. At the time, if you taught in the academic world, academia, in the specifically accounting and finance, you're going to make north of 150 grand a year. So I was like, okay, I do that. I can have summers off. It's not a bad living, and hopefully, eventually I'll be able to do something, take a risk down the road. And so graduated the MBA, went to Southern Illinois, like I said, doing the whole Midwest tour here, right? And got my doctorate down there. Lucky to be able to get in, and pretty good experience for me. And then went to Butler University in Indianapolis, and that happened in 2014. And so took the job there. And again, I kind of knew. Eventually, I wanted to do something in real estate or something, start a company, something like that again. But took some detours in there, was still kind of too involved in the race car stuff and just didn't really have the mindset or the character, I think, to be able to do it. And then, kind of starting over, I needed money. Now, the way the PhD program works is a little different. I didn't go to a bunch of debt to do this. They pay you to do it. So it's kind of a nice deal. Came out, worked for Butler for, I guess it was 6 years, 2020. And this is where the story really kind of begins. So 2019, I had finally kind of gotten to the point. 2018, I guess we'll back up. I was going through some stuff in my life and finally made that shift, I think, in my head to do something different and to change my character. So I really worked on mindset and discipline and character development more than anything. Read some books, went down that wormhole, and then found Bigger Pockets. And, started listening to everything that I possibly could, just consumed as much information as I could and knew that was probably where I wanted to take a step, was right there. was kind of waiting, I think, until I got tenure. I was always waiting. That's kind of a theme in my life. I've always had these roadblocks that I put in my head and waited, right? Whether the roadblocks were real or not is debatable. But in any event, so I wanted to get tenure. And if you don't know anything about academia, the way that works is, you go up for tenure with a committee. If they give you tenure, you essentially have a job for life. You don't, but you got to screw it up pretty badly to not have one. You get promoted, and if you don't get tenure, you get fired. You get let go. So you've got a year, and you got to get out of there. All indications were should have been okay. Had my boss was pretty behind me. Performance reviews were good, and we get into the tenure process. And if anybody knows anything about higher education, very political. And I'm not your typical PhD professor, if you can't tell. I wear cowboy boots and I drive a truck and I listen to country music, and I'm just not one of those guys. Never have been. And I think that probably played a bit of a role in the whole committee thing. So I wound up not getting tenure, and that was a big blow. Then life fell apart, and you can't really script kind of what happened next. That was the end of 2019. I went out with my friends that night, and hesitate to tell this to the world, but I'll do it. Went out with my friends that night, and we had, a couple of drinks at a Mexican restaurant. Go next door, we get a beer. I think I had 2 margaritas and a beer over the course of like 5 hours or something. And I got pulled over that night and get a DUI. And, a lot of circumstances surrounding that. I mean, I was barely over. I had no idea that I was even, drunk enough to be over the legal limit, but I was. And so, I take responsibility in that. A lot of situations kind of behind the scenes that I didn't know. I was in a county that's one of the big fundraisers for the big funding centers for their county and that kind of thing. But in any event, it happened. And so at that time I'm interviewing or starting to interview, and I had gotten a job offer in Nashville at Belmont University. And this is all going on in the background, and I have to tell them and disclose it. And they pulled the job offer. So I don't know what I'm gonna do, right? Now I've basically got a year, right? Left under contract, and this is March of 2020 that this goes down. And then, of course, we all know what happens in March of 2020, right? The world kind of stopped a little bit with COVID, and nobody really knew what was going to happen, and it impacted academia pretty heavily. There were no jobs, nobody was hiring, so I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I didn't have a license at the time, so I moved down to my parents. My parents had retired to Knoxville, Tellico Village area. And so I was down there for probably 3 months while this COVID stuff was going on. The lockdowns were happening, and I was trying to shift to figure out what am I going to do next. And, it's funny what happens when you're backed against a wall, because I really felt pretty backed against a wall. I didn't know, how much, I didn't know if I was going to get a job after this. And there were no jobs really to get at the time. And I knew that I had a year. So I said, you know what? I want to do this real estate thing. It's time to kind of take a dive. And so that's what I did. And we bought, I had about a year where I knew I'd be bankable under conventional loans. So I bought a piece of property in Oak Ridge, which is a suburb of Knoxville, and I was just going to do some long-term rental stuff. And wanted to do specifically Burr. I needed to force equity into properties. That's kind of what I needed to do, I felt like. So we went through, and me and my dad did that one. Me and my dad, my mom, tearing down wallpaper. This was like a family project, right? Like we, so what I would do is I would I'd work in Indianapolis for 3 days, and then I would drive down here for 4 days and the rest of the week and pretty much work on that house. And we got it to the point where it was, ready to be rented, and found another property. And it was kind of my plan to just keep doing this, right? To get into a property, work on it, and hire out the stuff that I couldn't do, and then move into the next one and do it again. Just keep doing this and doing this and doing this. So I was under contract on a triplex in Oak Ridge that I thought were pretty good numbers. It was a $300,000 property at the time. I think it did about $36,000 in revenue, and with rents escalating, all that works, right? I mean, this would have been a fairly decent deal overall. And I wind up, while I'm down here, looking up on Bigger Pockets and finding that there was a real estate meetup in Knoxville. And I was like, man, I'm here anyway. I need to kind of get introduced to that group of people who are doing this kind of stuff. And so lucky for me, I think that was like a Wednesday. And the next meetup was December of I guess it was December of 2020. The next meetup was on Thursday. So I went down there and met up with that group, and that happened to be Derek Tellier's group. And so I meet Derek, and Derek's talking about cabins, right? Cabins. And of course, at this point, I didn't know much about Airbnb. It felt a little risky to me. That's always felt like that to me. It was a super risky thing to do because all I knew about was not vacation markets. I just knew about Airbnbs and cities. And of course, the regulations at any moment they can pull that out from under you. I kind of knew about Nashville and some of the things that had happened there. I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do that stuff. And I said, you know what? The numbers look good. The numbers they're tossing around look better than this $300,000 triplex that I'm sitting on. So I'm under contract in this thing. I got 14 days or something to get the inspection done. We better go have a conversation so I can figure out if this is something we want to do. And I think that was Thursday. Met with Derek on Saturday in Gatlinburg. By the way, never had been to Gatlinburg in my life. Hardly knew what it was. Parents had lived here for about 5 years and somehow escaped or somehow never mentioned that this was a major market or a major thing going on near them. They didn't like it a whole lot. It kind of reminded them of the Wisconsin Dells from back home, and not really our thing. But that's all right. So we go down to Gatlinburg. We meet Derek, and he starts explaining the concept of the short-term shop and the concept of short-term rentals and vacation markets and kind of the numbers associated with some of those. And I'm looking at this going, $300,000 triplex I'm sitting on that I think is going to make about $12,000 net at the time. One bedroom cabins. This is crazy, right? It's like a year ago. At the time, one bedroom cabins were comping around 300. And so when we were looking at the numbers on those, it was 2 to 2.5 times what we were going to get in terms of cash flow. And I said, what the heck am I doing? If I can take the same capital and go do this, we need to go do that, right? So I think that would have been January or right at the end of December. We were under contract on the first cabin. I pulled out on the triplex through the inspection process and then ultimately try to find a cabin. We found our first cabin, I think, and closed on it by the end of January in 2021. So we're about a year out from where this all started. That first cabin was kind of a bird deal. It needed some work. It was a one bedroom with a loft. It had been long-term rented and it was messed up, had a basement in it. And, I offered in an escalation clause. I think they were asking $225. I offered up to $300, didn't get it. Somebody out of Nashville grabbed it and they came back around because it was on a shared well. And at the time, for whatever reason, the individual out of Nashville decided that scared the heck out of her. So she backed out of that. So we get through the school year. I come down here in May full time, grab my dad and my mom, and we go up there and do this again. Right. And kind of the way that the numbers worked out, it almost had to be that way where we had to work on this one ourselves. And so, luckily for me, I got a father who is incredible with this kind of stuff. I had no idea. And it's been a really cool experience for me because, I got a guy who you kind of rediscover that your dad is a superhero all over again, right? You don't know how these people learned what they did. It's not like they had YouTube and that kind of thing back in the day and somehow have figured all this stuff out. Because, my dad grew up, a little background on him. He grew up with nothing and is a self-made millionaire and has done quite a bit in the business world and done some commercial deals with real estate. And, when you grow up with nothing, I think you got to figure out how to do stuff on your own, which is kind of an art that's, I think, a little bit lost in today's world. And so in any event, he comes up there and we wind up spending the summer, most of the summer, and redid it. Went room to room. It was pretty much a remodel. I mean, we had to clean up some stuff, nothing structural, basically just room to room remodel. A lot easier than what our long-term rental was. Not having drywall helps things out a lot. But any event, so we redid that one and then got it on the market to do Airbnb and short-term rent it there in August. From August until the end of the year, that deal did, I think it was right around $28,000 to $30,000. So out of a one bedroom with a loft. So it did really, really well. And I attribute that a lot to the fact that we kind of went through it and optimized the property, went through and tried to make it as nice as we possibly could. So in any event, while this happens, this is, that takes you through August. From, I guess, the time that I closed on our deal in January, right about March, Derek comes to me and says, hey, I got this deal. I don't know if you'd be interested. At the time, now that we've kind of gone down this cabin path, I'm looking for everything that we can possibly buy that looks like a decent deal. And at the time, we thought we were overpaying on the stuff that we were getting up front. And now looking at it, of course we didn't, right? But that's what you think at the time. But in any event, so I'm looking to buy stuff, and I kind of have this because of the Burr thing that we were going to do long term. I wanted to find properties that we could force equity into. And there's this 7-property off-market deal. And we go up there and take a look at it. And I'm pretty green in all this. I don't know what I'm doing. And take a look at it. And I see 6 cabins or 7 cabins we got to rehab. And I'm like, man, this is awesome. Let's do this. And they're smaller cabins. They're kind of almost tiny homes, 500 square feet roughly. One of the biggest one I think is like 700. And so I start putting this deal on paper and trying to figure out, can we make this work? And, bring my dad up there. My dad's not happy about it. He's like, man, this is way too much. You don't know what you're doing. There's things in here that you're going to find that are going to be a mess. But, I'm young and stupid, and decided I was going to do this. And they said, okay, we'll help. And so they provided some capital along the way. In total, this is about a $400,000 rehab project. And I didn't think there was any way that we were going to actually get this thing. But got it. Bank said, all right, we'll fly with you on it. And so did that deal. And in June closed on it, and then started work on the first property. The first property was not that big of a rehab. It was probably the easiest one by far. It's the property that I'm in right now, actually. And then we kind of started work on the next 6. And the next 6 are up at the top of a mountain, and they're a lot of work. And so we're right about, I don't know, maybe a little bit over the halfway point on the rehabs of that. In the midst of this, I find my neighbor, who's 78 years old, from the first cabin that I bought up in Sky Harbor. We get to be pretty good friends. She lives up there full time. She's kind of a hoarder, but a really, really nice lady, kind of like your grandma, And she'd come down and see the work on this cabin that she used to own. So she's the one that sold it to me. They built both of those cabins that are up on this private lane in Sky Harbor. And she says to me at dinner one night, she says, I think I'd like to sell mine. I got to get off this mountain. I'm 78 years old and I can't handle this anymore. And so I said, well, what do you want? And so he came up with a number, and she said, well, I think I'd like you to buy it. So now we're in a contract on that. So I've actually got this one sold. The plan was to always just sell this one and flip it. Instead, what I did is I kept it and rented it for about 2.5 months to put some money back into the pot so that we could kind of help with the closing costs for the stuff up, or help with the holding costs for the stuff up top. And we'll 1031 that, working with Dave Foster to do that. 1031 the money out of this into that property. And last but not least, so that brings you up to what? 6 plus 1 is 7, and then another one is 8. There's one other deal that looks like I'd like to be able to do it. I don't know if we can pull it off, but there's this lot that's right below us in Sky Harbor. There's my cabin here. There's kind of the old lady's cabin here, which that property is really cool. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath with a garage that can be converted into a 3rd bedroom. And then also has an additional tiny house, bunkhouse, 1-bedroom, 1-bath detached unit with it, which would be really cool. We can rent separately. So in any event, there's this lot down below, and we tried to buy it at one point. They only wanted $15,000 for it. And they went through the septic permits and all that, and could only permit it for a 1-bedroom. And the way that it works, it's real long and narrow, and you couldn't get a well, a septic, and a property on it. But if I own this one and I own this one, then I become the only one that can do something with this lot. So ultimately, I think the plan will be to try to get that lot and develop it, put it off a shared well from the other cabins. So that's kind of my winding road. I mean, this has all happened in the last year. I closed on the first property in end of January of 2021. We're at February now, and this is all taken off. Now, in the midst of that, I find a job. So I do now have a full-time job, and I kind of have 2 full-time jobs. And I think this will be the lesson, and some of the questions that you can ask me is, I think a lot of people want to find this stuff. They want to find stuff that they can rehab and force equity into. And don't get me wrong, if I hear this one more time, I'm going to strangle somebody, but it will be worth it, right? It will be worth it when it's done. But the middle of it has been really hard. And I don't think people quite understand the depth of what I mean by that until you kind of experience it. I mean, I've had to make major, major sacrifices. I'm working in North Carolina 2 days a week. I get up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, drive out there 2.5 hours, teach, come back, and I've got to be here. So I get back here. And then the other remaining time during the week, I'm spending managing contractors. And I mean, you name it, I've had to kind of deal with it. And then, of course, trying to manage the short-term rentals that we've got too. So working two full-time jobs, trying to get to the point where I can not have any of them. So that's the winding road to get here. So.
My goodness. Well, I have a lot of notes and a lot of questions. So, I mean, that is a very anxiety inducing past few years. So I went to Belmont for my MBA.
Great place. Great school. Reminded me a lot of Butler. I mean, just a really neat place right in the heart of Nashville there. Would have been cool. But.
Yeah, it was cool. But they pulled your job offer. That is like, so you already have this feeling of rejection from not getting tenure from Butler. And then you go to get another job and it's looking pretty good. And then they rip that away from you too. I mean,
it was the hardest year of my life, but the funny part about it is, or not the funny part, but I think this has been a theme through my entire life. I tend to choose hard. And I mean, clearly I take seven cabins on at once, and I've never done any of this stuff. I'm going to try to rehab them all, right? I tend to choose hard. I'm a runner. I've done CrossFit in my past. I've kind of just always chosen the hard path. And, when things get hard, I think that's when you learn the most about yourself. And that's when you really figure out and reassess. When things are good, you're just kind of on autopilot, right? And so those challenges, the DUI, the losing the tenure, the not getting the job, and actually lost another job offer right after that. So a couple of things that happened right in a row that you couldn't script. And those really made me sit down and reassess, what do I want out of this life? What am I trying to do here? Right. And I don't know if I would have taken in a weird way, all of that pushed me into this place, because I was like, man, I got to do something. And this is what I want to do. How am I going to do it? And so I'm not sure I would have taken the steps to do it if not for those challenges. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still just like taking it all in of how anxiety inducing that whole year must have been, and like how you must have realized and thought, well, okay, I do not want these other people in control of my life anymore. These people who are, almost giving me jobs and then taking them away. That I can see how that would push you straight into something that you could better control yourself.
Yeah, initially I started out thinking, all right, we're gonna do this and try to create some passive streams of income in addition to or to supplement a job. I never when I really put pen to paper, when I started out on the long-term stuff, it was going to take like 25 to 30 doors to really get to the point where you could say, all right, I've got a comfortable living and enough equity here to be able to live without a job. And so really it was just to supplement, so that I was in a position where if any committee or if any job, said, hey, we're going to pull this from you, I wasn't in that position where it was the only stream of income that I had. It wasn't until really, I found the short-term stuff and looked at the cash flow and the numbers that were coming out of that I felt like, okay, maybe this is something we could do full-time and not have a job ultimately, with a lot less doors, a lot less than 30 doors to make it all work. So.
Yeah, totally. So there's another thing that you mentioned that I wanted to call out before we get into the nuts and bolts of all your rehabs. So you said, we went down to Gatlinburg, didn't really like it, wasn't really my thing, but I bought a property there anyway. So that is a nugget of wisdom. So a lot of people think, oh, well, I have to like going there. Well, I don't like going there. Why would other people like going there? It doesn't have to be your thing. Like, I'm the queen of things not being my thing. I don't want to hang out. I don't want to go anywhere. I don't like anybody. I don't like anything. Let's just be text friends. Like, I'm the person who hopes that you're going to text me and flake on our lunch date before we go. So like, I'm the queen of things not being my thing. It doesn't have to be your thing, as long as it's enough other people's thing to make the cash flow be there. So that's a really good point that I wanted to make. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be your favorite place to vacation. It's more about how many other people go there. Yeah,
it's crazy. I mean, sometimes I think it's a good thing that I'm here, because I'm like, I can get here and I can work on stuff. And then sometimes I'm kind of like, man, I wish it was 5 hours away. So I had to force myself to figure out how to do that eventually. Right. But at the same time, I'm analyzing this market, and I'm like, man, at the time we had 12 million, I think, visitors coming to the park. I can't remember what the next one is, but I mean, it's like a 10 million drop off to the next national park. When you drive through here, you recognize very quickly, even if you try to go down the parkway for the first time and it takes you an hour and a half to get down the thing, how popular this place is. So whether or not it's something that you particularly love, and there are parts of it now that I do enjoy, But at the time, I was kind of like, man, this is people and headache and nightmare. And I don't know. This is not my thing. But man, that's a lot of people's thing. Last year was 14 million people's thing. And,
Yep.
I'm all about trying to figure out how to make that work. So.
Cool. So let's get into the 6-unit deal. Sorry, 6, not 7. So
It's 7. It's 7.
Oh, it is 7.
Seven.
It is
Yeah,
7.
7.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So when you're going to buy a property that has 7 units on it, I'm going to take a wild guess and guess that that's not conventionally financeable, right?
Yeah, that's not conventional. I mean, we could have done it that way, and we did set it up with a commercial loan so that it can be refinanced into commercial or into a conventional type situation. That said, to do that would have been really, really hard. And my debt to income situation, when you start throwing $1 million loan in there and that kind of thing, would have been really, really tough to make this all work. So we had to do a portfolio loan with a commercial lender. I was kind of fortunate, I guess. A lot of what's happened here has been because of people that I've met along the way. And I bought this property, and of course, the way this worked was this was a private piece of land. They had this, 7 cabins on it. The cabin that we're in now is actually the office, and they converted it into a cabin, a 2-bedroom cabin. And then there were 6 1-bedrooms up at the top. I think 2 of them might have 1 bedroom with a loft, so essentially a 2-bedroom on Airbnb. But that's kind of what it was. And they had this planned unit development sitting there. So the guy that bought it was Austin Williams. Austin's done a lot of stuff in the Sevierville, Pigeon Forge area. Pretty well-known guy. Works with a lot of very, very well-known investors here. And Austin was trying to get the deal done, of course. What he wanted to do is he's like, I don't want to deal with rehabbing cabins, especially those things. I want to sell that off. And so that's how, Derek actually used to go to breakfast with those guys every week. And so, he talks to Derek and says, hey, if you know anybody be interested, I want to piece this off and sell it. And then there's 17 lots that they had developed or created on the way down at a planned unit development. And his plan was, at least initially, to go ahead and develop those lots, sell off the stuff that he didn't want to me, which would essentially fund, I think, that deal. And lo and behold, he introduces me to, I believe it was Daryl Roberts over at Tennessee State Bank. And like I said, I really didn't think that they were going to take a chance on this, but really what you find, and this is what I've found since, if it's a good deal, and it's got to be a good deal, right? Like I bought these things 50 cents on a dollar. Like it's got to be a good deal. And what I mean by 50 cents on a dollar is 50 cents of after repair value, and actually a little bit less because things have gone up now. If it's a good deal, money will find its way to make it happen. And put a business plan together. I had, a spreadsheet. Thank God I'm a CPA. I've got a spreadsheet with like 7 tabs sitting there, and that's really I showed that to Derek, and Derek was like, my head's exploding. I don't know what you've got sitting here, right? He's like, I'm kind of just aim shooting, and we'll figure it out later. But with something like this, I mean, there was enough capital there that it was going to take and suck up to do it, and there was enough going on, enough moving pieces that I really kind of had to be sure. Because I had a pretty limited pile of money sitting there. I mean, I had saved, and I had sold my house in Indianapolis and done pretty well. And I had, $300,000 or $400,000 in the bank to do something with. But when you're buying cabins and you're rehabbing cabins and you're getting into projects like this, it goes quick. And so I had to be sure that we were going to be able to make this happen. So.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about so you're saying you could have gotten it conventionally financed because it was technically already subdivided. So you could have just gone and gotten that many conventional loans. Got it. But you went portfolio.
Yep.
Okay. So if you don't mind getting into, I'm sure everybody's like, well, how much did you pay and how much is it worth? So we want to hear that stuff. So how much did you pay for that 7-unit quote development?
Oh man, I think we paid $975, all said and done. It's a little bit under $1 million.
That stings. That hurts me to think.
Yeah. But you gotta understand what I was walking into here. I mean, I couldn't even get into a lot of these units. They were long-term rented, and half of them I couldn't get into because they still had people in them. When we opened the door on a few of them, just to give you an idea of what I was messing with here. Finally got into one of them, opened the door up, and I mean, it looked like the floor was alive with roaches. I mean, just moving, right? Dog hair, and by dog hair, I don't mean a little dog hair. I mean like a tumbleweed of dog hair in the corner, and the whole place smelled like dog. Just terrible. I mean, an absolute disaster. Aside from that, We had some issues that I didn't know about. That's the way it always goes, right? So, there's a variety of things that were going on inside this property that made it distressed. I mean, that's just the way it was, right? When I put the numbers to it, you got to understand, I'm about halfway through this, maybe a little bit over halfway. I think we'll have this project done, I'm hoping, around June. And as of this recording, what is this, February?
Mm-hmm.
So we got 4 to 5 months left, I think, before we're really kind of to the point where I can rent these things. But in any event, and it's been about a year-long deal to get here. But in any event, the numbers on it, 975 bought it. I think that works out to like 137 or 140 a property. I budgeted to have about 40 to 45. So I think we'll be sitting at 185 in each one of these things by the time we're done. This is where it gets interesting, right? So the market has exploded and somehow coincided with the same time that I did all this, knock on wood, luckily. So when this is all said and done, we had one sell across the street here. It was a 480 square foot property, outdated, had like the red heart-shaped tub in it, and it went pending for, I think, around 360, 365. So this stuff with a view up at the top, remodeled, I'm guessing 375 to 4, somewhere in there. If you do that times 7, what is that? $2.4 million, or six times 4 is about 2.4 million. That's about what it'll be. I think 2.4 million after repair value. The 7th cabin down here, I actually already put it under contract to sell. Like I said, it was kind of always the goal to flip it, and that's the way that it was supposed to fund some of the stuff that I would have done at the top. Instead, I sold the Oak Ridge property and used that to fund the stuff at the top, and then I've 1031 this into that other property. So the numbers on this, 137, 140, I think when we bought it for, I put 18 in it, furnished. Got a pretty good deal.
My goodness.
to get stuff done. We completely remodeled it too. I mean, it was an easier remodel, but it was about $18,000. Furnish it, remodel it on the inside, redo the kitchen, everything. Rented it for 2.5 months. It made, I think, right around $15,000 in 2.5 months. Put it on pace for a little over 60 annually, which is probably about right for what it is. Didn't have a hot tub. I made it pet friendly, that kind of thing. And put it under contract for 350. Probably was a little bit low, but in all honesty, I kind of wanted it just to close. So we're supposed to close on that here at the end of February, and that'll be about a $200,000 proceeds, I guess, that'll go into the 1031 on the deal that we're doing up there in Sky Harbor. So all said and done, I'm going to force about $1 million of equity into this deal, I think, when we're done. And that's the advantage, right? Like my portfolio, when I'm done, I'll probably have at least at today's values, who knows what's going to happen, right? But about 3.75 million, I think, in assets. And the advantage of what I've done, and this is kind of where the it will pay off, comes in. There's two parts to this. I'll have about 1.4 in debt, so about 2.4 million in equity, all said and done, that we developed over the course of the last year. Whereas a lot of people, I think, when you're buying stuff at the kind of retail, 10% down, that kind of thing, you're going to have a lot more debt than I'm going to have when it's all said and done. And the other part of that is, because of that, the margins on this stuff. I mean, when we had a cabin next door, a little 1-bedroom that did about 60,000 last year. So I'm projecting to do somewhere between 50 and 60, but they should drop about 50% or more to the bottom line in cash flow. And that's simply because the debt structure that's on these things is just very, very different than if you had bought them with, a 90% finance deal. So that's the numbers on it. In theory, anyway. We're not there yet. That's the idea. So.
But you're well on your way. And
so.
For everyone who says like, oh, there's no good deals left anywhere, everything is shot through the roof, this would be an example, because this was just last year that you started. It's not like you started in 2012 and got all this. So deals are still out there. They're just harder to find. You just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other in terms of continuing to look for them. So I think that's a very encouraging message that, you just got started last year, and look at you go. So this is a really, really encouraging episode. I'm really happy with this.
And it's, if I have one piece of advice there, it's a network. You've mentioned it before. This is a small town, right? It is not a big metropolitan area. And so, the Austin Williams of this town and those kind of people, they control a lot. And if you can meet the right people along the way, that's where you're going to find some of this stuff. And I brought Derek into a lot of it. Derek's brought me into this deal. And so, I've tried to be as inclusive as I can with him, like selling this property. We found the buyer for this actually off market. My cleaner brought her to me, and brought Derek in to do that. And so, if you have the right relationships, you're gonna find things. That's a big deal. I think if you're hunting, not just the MLS, not just the stuff that everybody's fighting over, but trying to get out there and really talk to people and make things happen, I think you're gonna uncover some things along the way. It's just the way it works, right? It's the old laps funnel that Brandon Turner always talks about. So
yeah, absolutely. And one other thing I wanted to touch on, so there were long-term tenants in there. When you bought it. So did you have to wait out their leases, or did you give them cash for keys, or how'd you clear them out?
Yeah, that was part of the deal. I pretty much looked at Austin and said, I'm not buying this. We're not closing on this until you get those people out of there. That's your problem. I don't want to deal with it. And
Gotcha.
and Austin, to his credit, did. He had an apartment complex. He owns a fair amount of stuff in Sevierville. He had an apartment complex and basically said, look, we'll cash for keys into that. So you can go live in that place, and we'll make it work that way. These were a mess. Like I said, we pulled out the largest dumpsters that A&A had. We pulled 6 dumpster loads of just trash out of these things. So they've been a lot of work. They've been an absolute ton of work.
Gotcha. And a lot of times, guys, they'll be looking for opportunities, and they will overlook opportunities because they show up in overalls and look like hard work. So don't wait and I see a lot of people just out there in like Facebook groups and stuff that are just waiting for the right opportunity to just be handed to them on a silver platter with a perfect spreadsheet on top of it. And like, here, sir, please buy this property. And it's just not going to happen. You have to be ready to do some work to get things to where you want them to go.
Yeah, this has been a ton of work. I think a lot of people, like I said, they want to find stuff like this, but when you're in it, I'm going to tell you right now, this is hard. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, hands down. Like I said, I kind of thought we were going to rehab some properties, and we get up there and this has turned into pretty much a development project. I've got a developer down here. Jared Story is the construction guy. He works with Perry Smith. Perry Smith owns a lot of the go-kart tracks and that kind of thing down the strip. He's done Legacy Mountain and done a few developments along the way. So they know what they're doing. And he's putting in, 6-bed, 5-bath pool cabins all the way down the mountain below me. And so we've got to work together constantly on timing of utilities. And later today, I've got to draw up some HOA documents with him and try to figure some stuff out. We're sending over to an attorney. There has been way more involved here than I ever thought when I first started this. Now, that said, because of what he's doing down the mountain, it's definitely helped what I'm doing up on the top, and ultimately is going to be a great asset for me. So, but this has not been easy. I've had to sacrifice. Like I sold my house. I don't really have a house these days. Sometimes I stay in this cabin. Sometimes I've got this little bunkhouse that's part of the old lady's cabin that I'm buying, and I pay her some rent, and I live in that. It doesn't have heat. So there's been a lot of sacrifice to kind of do all this. And then, like I said, working a full-time job and trying to do this is another full-time job. And me and my dad, we got Adrian Delgado is my contractor. He's been a great guy.
You're going to regret saying that out loud on here.
I am. He's real selective on who he'll work with, and he's, I got him pretty much buried. So until we're all done with some things, I don't think he's going to want to take on a whole lot more. But Adrian has been a great guy and become a good friend. That said, there's an old adage, I can't remember what it is. You pay through you can get it cheap, you can get it done fast, you can get it done right. You choose to, right?
Yep.
And so we've had some struggles, just like you're going to have with everybody. I've got a pretty limited budget there, so I kind of had to go down that path. And sometimes we've had to figure things out together along the way. This is a way bigger project than he's ever taken on, and he's got guys that probably didn't know how to do some of the things that we've had to do. And so me and my dad have gone up there and worked with him side by side to do some of that stuff. So this has been a big time project, and very, 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 very involved. This is not a passive, hands off, I can do this from out of state. This is me up here 3 to 4 days a week outside of my full-time job, trying to manage contractors and make this happen. And, Adrian's been great. He's stuck by me, and we become friends out of it. And I hope he'll wind up redoing this other cabin that I've got up in Sky Harbor. So.
Well, I think before we get to the final three questions, the big takeaway with you, what you are a great example of, is mindset and a willingness to do the work. I think a lot of people get caught up in spreadsheets and obsessing, and it's really fun to obsess. Like I obsess over, my goal is I want to buy an apartment in New York City where we used to live. Obviously I'm not going to rent it out. It would be for us, and you just can't do it in New York City anyway. But like that's something that I look at, every night before I go to bed. I'm kind of cruising around, seeing what's up. And a lot of people do that until the end of time on short-term rentals and never buy anything because they don't really want to put in the work. But you're a very good example of what a willingness to want to work and to put it in, how that pays off. So very impressed by you for sure.
I oddly like work. I don't know. At the end of the day, this stuff's been a blast, and I've been able to work with my dad, and that's, I don't know how many, he's 71, 72 years old. Like, I don't know how much longer we're going to have to be able to do this kind of stuff together, which has been a blast for me. I've learned an absolute ton. Now, I don't know, in theory, the numbers should look good by the time we're done. It should be worth it. But even if it doesn't, I have learned enough at this point that I can actually do some development deals. So it's been awesome. And I hope that, it's kind of funny because I grew up in this world, and we'll talk about that when we get to the last three questions. But I grew up in this world where, I was really good at school, and in school you kind of have this way of doing things where you know everything and then you get tested, right? And so the goal is to know as much as you possibly can before you actually go take the test. And real life is not like that. Real life is take a leap, fly, learn as you do it. And that's what this deal has been. I mean, I put it on paper and I thought I kind of knew, but I really didn't know everything. I didn't, you can't know everything. And at that point I was so green, there's no way I could have. So, but took the leap, and we're figuring it out on the way down. And so far, anyway, knock on wood, it looks like it's going to be a pretty good gig by the time it's done. I hope so.
It will be. I can almost assure you of that. Okay, so last three questions of the episode. What advice would you give to 20-year-old Bryan?
Man, I thought about this one because you gave the three questions earlier. So, for the people who haven't been on the podcast, this one's coming. And of course, my answer is going to be, gosh, I wish I'd started sooner. Right. But there's a catch-22 to that. I was 21 and I kind of had the roadmap in front of me. I had read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'd grown up around the dinner table talking about business and entrepreneurship, and that was my dad. Right. And, then I go to work for this CPA firm, and I've literally got the roadmap of other people of how they're doing it. I knew what I was supposed to do. And I think, for a lot of people, I can hand you like a diet plan and say, this is what you need to do if you want to lose 15 pounds, right? But you still have to there's a step before that. That's the character development, the discipline, the traits. I don't know if they're traits, but they're skills that you learn along the way to develop you, the person, so that you, the person, can follow the plan. And 20-year-old Bryan couldn't do it. 20-year-old Bryan hadn't done that yet. I hadn't done the work. I hadn't figured out the awareness of me. I hadn't figured out what it was that I wanted ultimately. And I think until you kind of go through that development process of yourself, where you really develop you, your mindset, your character, so that you can go into something like this and have the discipline and the wherewithal, even through the fear of it all, to just get it done. I'm not sure that 20-year-old Bryan could have done this. So it probably worked out the way that it should have. I wish that I had, maybe back in 2008 when I was trying to figure out what I should have done, maybe I wish I would have been a real estate agent or done something in real estate to kind of get me a little bit further along. I wish I didn't have some of the mindset roadblocks that I had. Like, I don't have money. So I got to figure out a way to put some money in the bank before I go do this. I think the reality is I could have probably figured it out a little bit differently. But, until 2018, when I really went through that redevelopment of me, I'm not sure that 20-year-old Bryan could have done this. And so that's my advice to everybody out there is, work on you. Try to make sure you know where you're driving the ship, because the worst thing that you can do is work your butt off and figure out climb the ladder and figure out the ladder's leaning against the wrong wall, right? Because you never did the work on what it was that you wanted. So make sure you do that first. Once you get that step, then I guess I wish I would have said, do this sooner, right?
Great answer. Great answer. Okay, number 2, what advice would you give to a new investor who's looking to get started today?
Well, I think we just did that one.
They're kind of related.
You know, there's a second part to that, right? Like, you know, I read this, I listened to a podcast on the way over here this morning. I do that a lot. I'm in the car a lot. So I listen to books and I listen to podcasts pretty much constantly. And a lot of what I do is I listen to stuff outside of real estate, mainly on mindset. The one that I listened to this morning, great podcast. I'm going to plug it. Ben Bergeron was the guy. Ben Bergeron is a coach of high-level CrossFit athletes. And I've really gotten into his stuff because he does a lot on mindset and on character development. In any event, the podcast this morning said it was on the big three, and the big three were awareness, intention, and massive action. And you know, we just talked about the awareness piece. You got to kind of figure out what it is that you want, where you're driving the ship, all that stuff. What makes you, so that you can go figure out what it is that you want to do. The second part of that is intention, and that is, you know, eliminate all the things that are kind of extraneous and focus on what's going to get you to that place, right? Which for me was this discovery of bigger pockets and trying to learn as much as I possibly could. But even after that, and everybody that's done this is going to say this, you don't really learn until you go do it. And so you've got to kind of jump off and take that leap. And that's hard because everything that you've been ingrained in you is, you know, you need to know or you need to be sure. And there is no surety here. There are no guarantees. You just have to take the leap. I had a spreadsheet. I thought I knew how this was going to go. It has not gone that way. But in some respects it has, right? And so taking the leap and doing it is where I've learned so much. And until you kind of go and get one under contract or put in the offers and start doing the work to get one of these things, you're really not going to get the education that you need. The education you need is from doing. So
Absolutely agree with that. And the very last question, what is your favorite book that has impacted your mindset?
Yeah, I just mentioned one of them, the podcast series. I do a lot of audiobooks and that kind of thing. The podcast series is really good, especially some of Ben's older stuff. It's all about you know, trying to find your purpose in life and what it is that you and how to go attack that, how to get after it. So that's a big one. And then also as far as book goes, this is not a real estate book. Everybody's going to say Rich Dad, Poor Dad. They're going to say real estate books. It's not. It's a 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I try to read that or reread that once a year. It's such a good book for basically how to do anything that you want to do in your life, whether it's relationships or love or friendships or career, business, any of it. It pretty much breaks down how to, in a systematized process, how to go and actually create habits that are going to create success for you. And before I get out of here, I got to thank a few people. Derek Tellier, for sure. Derek has been a good friend, become a good friend. And you guys, for what you do, I don't know if I would have taken the leap if I didn't feel like there was some level of, I don't know, education that came along with this. So you filled a niche that at the time was sorely needed, at least by me, and I'm sure by other investors. Well, thank you guys. I want to thank all the guys in the real estate group, the real estate investor group that we go to on Thursday nights. It's the last Thursday night of the month at Barley's in Knoxville. If anybody's local listening to this, got a lot of people that do cabins over there. I got a lot of people that do. We've got a property inspector that I've now become really good friends with. Some long-term rental people that, you know, we got kind of everything, flippers, wholesalers, all of it. That's been a great group. And like I said, you know, getting to know people is a big deal in this. Best thing I did here was honestly, I texted Derek one night because I was in town a lot trying to do his rehabs. And I said, hey man, you want to go to dinner? And he's like, I can't, we go to trivia tonight. And I texted him back about 10 minutes later. I said, hey, do you care if I show up? And I'm sure he was kind of like, crap, you know, I'm on the spot here. Like, I don't want to bring one of my clients to this thing. Right. And wind up going to that. Now I go every Wednesday and met all of those people, and they have become great resources for me and just really good friends. You know, we kind of hang out. So that's been a good group. Got to thank my parents, of course. They have been amazing in this. Yeah, they choked me up. They're they've been awesome. They've been absolutely awesome. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's a very, very encouraging episode. I think everybody's really going to like it and take a lot away from it. And you clearly, you know, you've done the work and you deserve it. You deserve to be successful. So thank you so much for coming on, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you, Avery. Let's do this again in a year and see how this turned out.
Let's do it.
All right.